What's going on, ladies and gents? It's nice to chop it up with you again. So, ahead of the 2022 NFL draft that's coming up in a couple weeks, and a lot of the more recent mock drafts that have been coming out, which have shown a lot more shift in where they think the Jets' focus is going to be. We've seen like a Garrett Wilson get mocked to us at number 4, a Drake London at number 10. And if we don't move, maybe those are realistic options for us. But I kind of wanted to take a look at the wide receiver room again and see if it absolutely requires for us to have to spend a pick, a round one pick, on a wide receiver, which would potentially be a reach by any measure from any of the analysts you guys have heard about. And can we wait until the later rounds and pick somebody up? So this is all essentially going to be centered around the development of the wide receiver room, but more specifically, one player, which would be Denzel Mims. So let's go ahead and get into it. This will be a little bit more stat heavy, but it just kind of builds out the overall picture for you guys. So Corey Davis, our default number one wide receiver up front. So Corey Davis had 34 receptions, 492 yards, and 4 touchdowns in 9 games for 2021. When we take a look at kind of what his potential output would have been, he's hovering somewhere between like 950 yards to just over about 1,000 and maybe 8 touchdowns. Which is pretty good. You know, if he breaks the 1,000-yard mark, that's essentially the starting point for us. Number one wide receivers these days are, breaking the mold of 12, 13, 1,400 yards, but we haven't had 1,000-yard receivers since Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker was in the building, so we would be all for it. Now, he had 59 targets overall. 25% of those came out of the slot. The big critical issue here was that he had 8 drops. Uncharacteristic of him, actually. He hovers somewhere closer in the 2 to 3 range from what I recall. But if he brings those down, that's already potentially a bump in about 100 to 150 yards. I don't care about the yardage so much, more so in that the catches they weren't the most accurate balls from Zach Wilson, but it's one where they were already in his hands and he just kind of flubbed it. So concentration lapses, maybe situations where we're playing catch up and people are trying to force the issue in certain things, I'm sure also played a part in it. But we're taking a look at a strong number 2 wide receiver for all intents and purposes based on the on-field product. At season's end, from reports I've been able to check up on, that's essentially the feeling that the New York Jets have as well. They have a strong number 2. They took a swing on a potential number 1 wide receiver in free agency. It didn't pan out that way. He still has the potential. You're talking about a 6'3" speed threat. So it's not it's not a swing and a miss necessarily. It's just that we didn't get, hopefully, what we were looking for, ideally, at least in terms of somebody blossoming. But you have to imagine JD and Robert Saleh, they're taking a look at the ceiling and the floor for all of the candidates that they bring in, much like, for the NFL draft. Now, this brings us to potentially one of the best players that we're going to look at in our room for the 2022 season, in Elijah Moore. Now, he has 43 receptions, 538 yards, and he gets 5 touchdowns in 11 games. He could have had a much more dynamic season if it weren't for a couple drops. He had 6. There was also a lot of missed plays out there that Zach Wilson just didn't take, and then a lot of big play opportunities where he was either overthrown or underthrown on. And we've seen him pretty much be a threat at all 3 levels, which is what I love the most. He also showed some pretty dynamic yards after catch ability, which is great in this West Coast offense. Is essentially what they're kind of predicated on. He's had the biggest share, the lion's share in the offense, essentially 7 targets, and then 26% of those out of the slot. So you start to kind of see a theme for, essentially the top 3 players on the offense, where much to what JD and more specifically Robert Saleh mentioned in some of his press conferences when he was pressed about one of the other players in Denzel Mims, they want the players to know all 3 roles. You won't see necessarily, and I can't even necessarily say it's balanced, but you won't necessarily see this much of a split between a whole lot of offenses where you see consistent snaps on the slot for almost all players. Which brings me to the, I guess, outlier in this offense in Braxton Berrios. Now, probably the most consistent player and the one that offered the most pop for us in the offense when we needed it. Braxton Berrios balled out. It doesn't show anything crazy on the stat sheet. 46 receptions, 431 yards, 2 touchdowns. But much like Elijah Moore, he was able to get involved in a run game. He was able to be an all-pro returner for us. And he even offered, some of those gadget plays that we love to see. So Braxton Berrios is simply put, a weapon for us. Think of him as our version of Cordarrelle Patterson almost. 95% of his slots came out of the slot. Of his snaps came out of the slot, though. So we know what he is in comparison to what they tried to do with Elijah Moore, where we've seen more on the boundary a lot more. And we've seen a lot of, analysts, etc., feel like he was playing out of position, where he could have had a much bigger impact inside. But we drafted Elijah Moore for his ability to be able to do everything from all over the field. So I think that expectation was already set in place when he came out of Ole Miss. Now, Braxton Berrios, 65 targets on the season, second most in targets. And it showed. This is purely, from my standpoint, mostly a chemistry thing with Zach Wilson. So you've seen it on tape. Braxton Berrios kind of offers something different. He morphed into whatever the offense needed at various times. So for some weeks, he was a yards after catch master. Some weeks he just happened to be available in soft zone coverages all the time. Some weeks he was, offering the field advantage for us in the return game. And then in some weeks he was actually our best catch in traffic player. And we're talking about Elijah Moore and Braxton Berrios as some of the more smaller stature people that we have on the offense. It was just beautiful to see. He was definitely I don't want to say boom or bust, but he was essentially kind of like the igniter on the offense for us. Once he got a big play, things seemed to calm down and everybody else got a lot more focused. So I love it. And we're talking about some of our top three guys here. So Corey Davis, fringe 1,000-yard receiver. Elijah Moore could have topped about 1,000 yards. Braxton Berrios could have been somewhere in like the 600 range with about 4 or 5 touchdowns, which would have been great. And then we get to our most enigmatic player on the roster. And this is in some time. I don't think we've seen anybody else that necessarily has experienced the same kind of troubles and the same level of discussion around why he can't get on the field. So Denzel Mims, 8 receptions, 133 yards. We have no touchdowns so far in his career. He had only 23 targets, 23% of his snaps out of the slot. He also had 4 drops, so the worst catch rate on the team by far in such a small sample size. The thing that's frustrating is that a lot of people understand how freakishly gifted Denzel Mims is. Just to compare, for you guys, Julio Jones is arguably one of the best wide receivers in this past decade that we've been able to see. And he has almost identical measurables to the guy. I mean, 6'3" height. He has the same weight class size, basically. Almost the same wingspan. He has almost the same 40 times, 20-yard shuttles, 3 cone drills, vertical. I mean, it's all there. From if you wanted to build a number 1 wide receiver in a lab and just give him all these traits, it's Denzel Mims. He's also still young, 24. And when we take a look at his situation, it's a lot more complex than what I think the media put out there. So his rookie year, we see him deal with hamstring injuries, so he doesn't actually get like a normal offseason. He doesn't get to really work on his conditioning, his understanding of playbook, anything there. He's also with Adam Gase. We've had a lot of terrible play calling, a lot of pressure that's put on Sam Darnold in terms of kind of like treating him in the same mode he would at Peyton Manning, I suppose. And then pulling the reins back a lot when it wasn't working out. And then just generally turmoil in the team, right? And then he just couldn't see the field. So whatever he could have developed, we didn't really see. But he still put together a successful rookie season, topping over about 300 yards and getting, generally some pretty good plays on film for us. His sophomore year comes about. We bring in Zach Wilson. We refresh the offense. Everybody feels great about the coaching staff. Boom, food poisoning. And we hear about it late, so we're wondering why we're not, hearing any Denzel Mims news. Food poisoning, he loses 20 pounds. He has to work through not only that, but then trying to gain the weight back, go through conditioning. He's learning a playbook for the second time in 2 years. And this West Coast playbook that LaFleur brings over isn't a simple playbook by any means. I mean, excuse me. On any given play, the wide receiver has to account for so many things. For one, what's his lineup? Is he running out of slot? Is he a boundary receiver? And then, what's he doing? An X, a Z, etc. Is he going to run a slant? What's the play call essentially? He has to take a look at what the defense is doing. And this isn't different for anybody else, but a lot of offenses make this kind of process a lot more simpler. So if he's running a slant, he has to know what's happening, of course, in the slot and the other side. He has to know who's covering him. If it's press, if it's man, how deep are the drops if it is off coverage. And then, of course, post-snap is when everything lights up. Once the ball's actually snapped, he has to react to what's going on. And it's a little difficult because it is judgment plays that they're essentially making in the wide receiver room. Depending on what they get shown once the ball is snapped, the route can change, dramatically. What was a slant can now become a go route. It can become a curl. It can become a quick out, etc. So there's a lot of nuance in what's happening on a very simple play. You're talking about a player that has just been trying to focus on staying healthy and getting on the field, let alone, being able to work the playbook. So he can go out there and put his head in the books all day, but if he can't try to replicate it on the field, it's not necessarily going to stick. We also have to keep in mind from Baylor, he wasn't asked to really have a complicated route tree either. Honestly, a lot of what he was doing was really out-athleting everybody else. When you put the ridiculous measurables that he had, it wasn't really much of a chance a lot of the cornerbacks at that level at that time were going to offer to be able to stop him. So I would have to imagine that JD, when he selected Denzel Mims in the second, was betting on a lot of the ridiculous traits that he's seen on field and hoping that he develops the mental part of the game. That hasn't happened yet. So again, he lost the offseason rookie year. He lost the offseason this year, or last year anyways, due to the food poisoning. And then when he does try to make it back, he's already behind. I mean, Corey Davis, Elijah Moore, Braxton Berrios is ahead of him. We see Jeff Smith get playing time over him. I think at one point, even DJ Montgomery and Tariq Black might have been ahead of him at some point. So it was disappointing. We had a lot of questions. When pressed, Robert Saleh again, kind of mentioned he has to understand what's happening on the field. And essentially what it boiled down to. He doesn't know enough about his own routes, let alone what's happening at the other 2 or 3 positions, depending on, how many wide receivers we have out there to be successful. And he doesn't offer any special teams capabilities really either. So they can't even say, we'll roll him out in a couple packages. Which is why I think when we seen the last couple weeks of the season, I believe it was about the last 5 when he was able to get out there and have a chance, his head's probably swimming at that point. He's, not been trusted at this point to really go out there. It would have been great to see something from him. I think from an effort standpoint, everything about, kind of his body language showed that he was in a lull. It wasn't great. So moving into this junior year, he has time to actually be healthy, go into the playbook. I was excited to hear that he was going to be in Arizona with Zach Wilson, and I believe Arizona was Elijah Moore, DJ Montgomery, Jeff Smith. Maybe some other players are going to come out and really get a feel for it, especially since we were going to have quarterback coach John Beck out there as well. I mean, again, we're not talking just playground football. We're talking them actually going out there to practice the playbook, get a feel for each other, nuance some things out. So the biggest stressor overall for Denzel Mims is going to be the mental errors, the playbook understanding. If he capitalizes on that, let's say he even gets 50% of the playbook down, that's going to open up a whole new world of things on what he can do in this offense. I think another good sign for us as well is JD in recent weeks has been mentioning that Denzel Mims isn't just sitting on his fingers, just chilling out, playing Madden and doing whatever. He's showing workout videos. Now, what that consists of, we don't know, but you imagine, general physical training, as well as probably understanding of the playbook, running some routes, things like that, so that the coaching staff knows he is prepping extremely hard. All of this for me leads me to say that, and I've gone on record saying this already, I would love to still see a Drake London at 10. It would be a bit of a reach to me, but still, if we want to force the wide receiver issue, that's going to be my guy. I think we need an absolute boundary receiver because we have enough players that can kind of do the multiple different roles. Play the slot, maybe do some gadget things, But we don't have anybody that's consistently dominated at the boundary position. Now, if we're going to go round two, and keep in mind, this is all based on the expected plan in my head that we see Denzel Mims become a main contributor. What that looks like in terms of like a breakout season for him, who knows? Maybe somewhere in the 500 to 600 range yard, and maybe if he can rack up a lot of red zone touchdowns, that would suffice us to say that, let's keep him around the fourth year. Let's see if we can get a contract extension out of him, which I think honestly would be a steal at this point, because while a lot of these NFL contracts lately have been betting on the upside of certain players. For example, when I think of the Christian Kirk contract, the Jaguars were going to, spend any amount of money to make that happen. We should be able to kind of get a home field discount. I would feel like out of Denzel Mims as let's call it maybe respect for the coaching staff and continuing to try to work with him, even though it hasn't seemed like it, and allowing him the opportunity to come in here and show why he was a round two prospect. Now, whether, JD's true intentions on what could happen when Denzel Mims will be decided in the draft. If we don't pick in round one, I think that speaks volumes to him thinking that we do have a solid four-man rotation in Corey Davis, Elijah Moore, Denzel Mims, and Braxton Berrios. If we spend one in round one, then maybe he's not fully sold on what can happen there. And, maybe he does ultimately end up getting released after the season or traded, something like that. But as far as round two prospects, my three go-tos that I've kind of been settled on for a while, and they might not even be here anymore, but George Pickens, Christian Watson, who I've become a lot more high on recently, and then one of my sneaky gems, Sky Moore. Sky Moore is an excellent route runner. He brings a level of, attacking mentality to the offense that I think we haven't seen, and he plays bigger than this 5'10" frame. I think he's a guy that can come in and immediately kind of have a bit of an Elijah Moore impact, just in terms of picking up the playbook very quick, and then being able to go out there and produce against certain offenses as, a number 4 right away. George Pickens, I think, has, again, kind of that mold of he's almost looked like a number 1 wide receiver at certain times during Georgia. He just hasn't been able to stay healthy, which is the case, keep in mind, with almost every prospect in this NFL draft. It's very few players that have been healthy recently or for the majority of their career as a whole. So it really is a toss-up with a lot of these players. Anyways, people are really betting on the recovery and kind of what they imagine them to be in their offense. And then Christian Watson. Christian Watson, I'm picking for the same reasons we picked Denzel Mims. He would be the ultimate athlete. And for what he's shown on film, he would be a yards after catch master immediately. I think we would have to manufacture touches for him. Again, not the best route runner coming out. But when you think about what he can be, if he can get developed much along, again, the same lines of Denzel Mims, you can have an absolute monster. 6'4" beast that has, 4.38 wheels. He's hard to bring down. He's been very elusive. And again, yards after catch. If you've seen some of his highlight tapes and just plays in general, there's always, 2 to 3 plays where he either finds the perfect crease and outruns everybody, or he's able to break a ridiculous amount of tackles and make something happen out of nowhere. So I would be very, at this point, I would be fine with that selection. But I think all in all, again, I think Denzel Mims deserves at least this last opportunity to, especially in the draft is very uncertain at the wide receiver position. Let's invest a round 2, maybe even round 3 pick in a wide receiver that has that potential. Let them develop. And then in the 2023 draft, if it just doesn't pair out, then we can figure out something and make it work. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are on kind of the whole wide receiver room. How do you guys feel about Denzel Mims being able to kind of bounce back and actually produce in this offense? Or do you guys feel that we absolutely need a round 1 target? Peace.